My name is Aurora Ball. I'm with the Mississippi Department of Mental Health, and I'm here to get started with a series of training on the golden thread of assessment, planning, and progress notes. The Mississippi Department of Mental Health provides hope by supporting a continuum of care for people with mental illness, intellectual or developmental disabilities, and alcohol and drug addiction. Services are provided through our state-operated programs and community services programs, regional community mental health centers, and other nonprofit service agencies or organizations. So basically the training, I guess I said before, it's about the golden thread of assessment, plans, and progress notes. The assessment is the beginning of the process. The assessments establish a medical necessity and identify symptoms and behaviors to be addressed in the plan. And then once you do the assessment, identifying those symptoms and behaviors, then you're moving the thread through the plan. And the plan structures the treatment to accomplish the identified goals and objectives using specific interventions. And you're going from the plan to the progress notes. And the progress notes the flow from the plan, and it documents the services provided and the individual's response to those interventions. And the notes lead you back to the review or an update of the plan. So it's like the cycle continues into discharge. So basically you're going from the assessment, which is identifying the diagnosis and the symptoms and the behaviors. And the information from the assessment leads you to developing a plan, which is going to address your goals, objectives, and interventions. And then information from the plan is going to be documenting your progress notes, which is documenting whether those services are provided, which documents the services are provided, as well as the individual's response to those interventions. And that cycle continues until discharge. So we begin with the assessment process. Assessment is the foundation for determining the services. It's basically where you're gathering all the information, the relevant information about the person, their environment, and their needs, and what they hope to accomplish through the intervention. The assessment is basically the initial building block for the trust and the helping relationship. The basic assessment is the first opportunity you have to interact with the individual receiving services and or their support system. And this process can kind of make or break the buy-in of the individual for the services. So it's their first opportunity to kind of understand what is going on and to be a part of the process. So basically the most important thing with the assessment process is kind of slow it down and make sure that the individual is a part of the process and engaged in the process. And a couple of things we're going to talk about before we actually get into the assessment is how to prepare people to be a part of the process and be a part of this assessment. So one of the first things we talk about is trying to prepare people and to educate them about the process. A lot of people, when they come into the assessment, they have no idea what to expect, what is in store for them. So one of the things that we would recommend is that maybe someone can contact them prior to the appointment and give them an idea, okay, this is what you can expect when you come to the appointment. It might take about an hour and a half. We're gonna ask you some questions about your housing situation, what your goals are, any trauma or issues you've had as a result of your diagnosis, to kind of prepare people to know what can I expect when I show up for the assessment process. And it's also a great opportunity to let them know that, you might not be at a place where you can answer some of these questions. So it may be a good idea to bring a support system, somebody who can help you to talk about what is going on with you and what your life looked like prior to the impact of the diagnosis. So a lot of people have no idea that they can bring a support person with them to help them, to comfort them through this process. We also think it's a great opportunity to educate people about the system and the process. We're saying, okay, you want to be involved in your treatment and being able to talk about some of our services, but a lot of people may come in and have no idea about the services that are provided. So maybe you can send them some information about, you can view our website or have someone to talk to them about the supports and the services provided by your program. But the most important thing here is just to do whatever we can to make sure that the people receiving services are prepared for this intake process and they have enough information to make informed decisions. Another thing in preparing them is the environment. Just making sure that we have a welcoming environment. One of the things you can say, like, you look at your organization, when a person walks in for the intake, what is the experience you think they would get when they walk into the intake area? Now, is it welcoming? Is there even a welcome sign when they're coming in? How are the seats structured in the waiting area? Some people, because of the traumatic experience, may not feel as comfortable with all the chairs kind of clustered in together. When you walk up to the person in the waiting behind the screen, what do they say? Are they looking up saying, good morning? how you doing, welcome, or are they just saying, what's your name and your social security number, what's your date of appointment, and probably barely even making eye contact with people. So we're just saying, just take a look at your environment and see how welcoming it is to the person who's coming in, and are they feeling safe? Are they comfortable? Are there messages of recovery on the wall? Are the messages or the pictures on the wall culturally diverse? So just kind of take a look at your environment, see what you think a person would experience if they came into your program for the assessment process. Another area we talk about is making sure that the interview format is kind of semi-structured. What we like to say is you want it to be like a conversation and not an interrogation. And the best way to do that is just to be comfortable with your instrument. And sometimes when a person walks in, you can say, what happened? What brought you here? And some people start out talking, they've answered 20 questions in the assessment process before they even, get started good. Other people, you may have to ask a few more questions to get them comfortable talking. But if you're comfortable with your instrument, you don't have to kind of repeat the questions and going down, from one question to the next question to the next question, because a lot of times they've answered those questions. I've talked with people where they've said, it's almost like the person wasn't listening, because 2 minutes later, I just told you about my family dynamics. But it just so happens the next question is about family dynamics, and you asked me the question again, so you weren't listening. So, you have to be really comfortable with your instrument, your assessment instrument, so that you don't have to repeat questions. We also talked that it needs to be a collaborative partnership. You're not, the clinical person, staff is an expert in the room, but you're not the only expert in the room. The person receiving service is also an expert on themselves. So together, you create a partnership on what is in the best interest of the person receiving services, and making sure you're looking at what is good for them as well as what is best to them. And finally, in the process, we talk about making sure that it's understandable, which is a step above readability. And they may be able to read the information that's before them, but do they really understand what is presented to them? And it may be a situation where you can kind of do an overview of some of the materials and give them a copy of some things to take home to make sure that they really understand what it is that they're signing. Because we have to think that when people come into the system, they're there because it had a tremendous impact on their quality of life. And so they may not be at a place in their wellness where they can truly be able to read and comprehend all this information that's being placed before them. So sometimes we have to slow it down and make sure that they really do understand what it is that has been presented to them. But again, these are some things that kind of help to prep the process to make sure that it's the best environment for the individual receiving services and a great environment for the clinical staff, and making sure that everybody's at the best place that they can be with enough information to make the best decisions as far as their treatment is concerned. So again, we kind of get into what is a part of the assessment process. The first thing they look at is the description of need. One of the things you want to talk with the person about when they come there is why, what brought you here? What is the reason that you're seeking services today? And what is needed for you to have a better quality of life? So this is from the person's perspective. It's not a clinical analysis of it, but you're just asking a person, what brought you here today? What is that you need? What are your goals and your objectives? So again, this is just a general statement of the description of the need as far as the individual receiving services is concerned. And we also are looking at trauma relevant type information. There is a trauma assessment where you're assessing about persons, the trauma and impact they have on their lives. And we just have to recognize that most persons with a mental health diagnosis had some trauma in their lives. So most likely the person does have some trauma-related concerns. But of course, in a 1 hour, 2 hour assessment, you're probably not going to get to the details of all of their trauma. But just recognizing there is some trauma, because most people are not as comfortable at the beginning to talk about everything that's going on in their lives, but recognizing that there is some trauma. And when you do the trauma assessment, just take note, if you have a lot of yeses, then that trauma needs to be a part of their treatment plan, because if you're saying all these things are present in their lives and it hasn't been dealt with, then it needs to be incorporated into the plan. And if you have a lot of no's, then recognizing that most people have had some trauma, then it may be a conversation you need to continue on and be able to come back and address that later on in their plan. And also in regard to cultural factors with impact treatment, just being aware that every culture has a different way of looking at mental health. And their culture can influence how the people describe and even how they feel about their symptoms. And so you just have to make sure that you're aware of the different cultures and educate yourself on the different cultures and how those cultures relate to their mental illness, and making sure you're providing services that are culturally responsive. And then another area we look at is that the assessment process has to be continuous. Even though you're only doing the assessment one time, just assessing people is ongoing. So you don't just do it one time. You continue to gather information and making changes to the plan, because you have to think in terms of the plan is going to change because people change. So there's also going to be information being gathered after the initial assessment has been completed. And sometimes you may have to do an addendum to your plan, but this is always being addressed in your progress notes, so you're continuing on with your assessment process, and it's not a one-time assessment. And I think this is important because as you get to know people, and if you're still establishing rapport and a relationship with people, then you're getting more information about what is going on with them, and that information becomes relevant, or even more relevant after the assessment, because you're getting to know the person and figuring out some things that you didn't gather during the first day of the assessment. Especially, after treatment has started and it's working, and people are getting better and having a better quality of life and understanding of what's going on with them, they're going to be disclosing additional information. And finally, we want to talk about that the assessment has to be, it's a comprehensive process. You're looking at various areas of life functioning. And these areas of life functioning includes your support system, meaningful activities, living situations, employment, medical history, education, safety and legal issues, and substance use, just to name a few. So basically what we're saying is when you're assessing the person's receiving services, these are the areas of life functioning that's going to be affecting people. So regardless of what their diagnosis is, these are some areas that's going to be affected as a result of their diagnosis. For example, you're going to ask them questions about their support system. In the past, we tend to say when it comes to their support system, you say they have a mother or father, or they have family members. What we're looking at here is you need to get enough information to figure out, is this a potential goal for people? This is a potential areas that's being impacted by their diagnosis. So just because you say they have a parent or a family member, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a support system that's beneficial for them. So you have to ask some additional questions like, okay, how does your family member support you? Is that adequate for you? Would you like for that to be more? Would you like for that to be different? Or when you talk about their living situation, you may say they live with their parents, okay? But are you happy with this living situation or this living arrangement? What would a better living arrangement look like for you? What are some of the things that's important to you in your living arrangement? So you want to ask enough questions. Say, first off, you want to know what is a fact? What is the situation? What is your living arrangement? And then the next question is it satisfactory to you? And if it's not, what would you want it to look like? And then you start thinking in terms of, well, what's standing in the way of you having that? So you want to ask enough information because potentially these life functioning areas are potential goals for everybody. So when you think about it, when you look at all these areas, there's a potential for a person to have a goal in these areas. Like even when you look at the medical history, you want to ask questions like, if you're African-American male, 45 years or older, have you had your annual exams? Have you had your prostate exam? If you're female, have you had all the exams associated with your race or your sex? And if they've not, and that's a potential goal for them to say, okay, we need to make sure that you have these annual exams. Or if you see the person wearing glasses, or when the last time you had your eye exam? Because just because they're wearing glasses, I've met people who hadn't had an eye exam in 3 or 4 years. So just making sure that they've had their annual exams, and if they have a medical history, then making sure they have a follow-up. So again, you kind of take all these life functioning areas, and then you're just asking them, what is a fact, what is happening in these areas, and then what would you like for it to be like? And then find out what's standing in the way, because all these areas are potential goals for persons receiving services. And another area we look at is their readiness for change when it comes to these areas. Even though people have a potential for a goal, let's say education, their health, their social roles, everybody's not at the same place in these potential goals. If I have 2 goals, I may be at the action stage when it comes to going to work. I might be ready to go to work and doing everything I need to do to go to work. But when it comes to dealing with some other areas of the impact of my illness, I might be at the pre-contemplation stage, which means I'm not that concerned about it. It has no impact on me whatsoever. So wherever people are in their stage of readiness, as far as their goals are concerned, that is where we want to meet them at. So we want to have the conversation with them to find out where they are, because if you have more than one goal, you're not going to be at the same stage of readiness for each goal. So for example, when it comes to me dealing with my substance use, I may be at that pre-contemplation stage and saying it has no barrier. It's not a problem for me. It's only a problem for other people. It's not a problem for me. So you want to get them to the place where they're not at pre-contemplation when it comes to substance use, but provide them the support to get them from pre-contemplation to contemplation. This is important because when you set goals, you want that goal to relate to where they are in their stage of readiness. If I'm at a pre-contemplation stage when it comes to my substance use or getting a job, but you give me objectives and intervention that's action-oriented, then it's over my head. You'll find that the only person that's working the plan is you, because that plan is not where I am as far as my stage of readiness. So you have to make sure that whatever the goals are, that they align with people's stage of readiness to attack those goals and objectives. Also, when we're looking at the assessment process, we want to look at what's important to the person as well as what's important for the person. So when you look at all those areas of life functioning, for some of those people, some of those things are what's important to them, like the social roles, the things that I do, the places I go, all these different quality of life areas. That's what's important to me, the people I want to do things with. But at the same time, we, as the clinical staff, have to make sure we're addressing things that's important for them as well as important too, so we have to kind of balance it. We can't have all goals and objectives that's based on what's important for a person, because then they're not as committed and have that buy-in. So you have to kind of balance. We have to put some things in there that's important to them, but we can't negate the fact that we have to place some things in there that's important for them. And when it comes to important for, sometimes people look like at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like, your basic health and safety has to be a priority. So that has to be a part of, if you're not living in a safe place and your health is at risk, then, we're not gonna have our goals that's focusing on, I wanna have a social role, I wanna have a boyfriend, I wanna have an intimate relationship with someone. Those things are important to you and we wanna deal with those, but at the same time, we gotta address your health and safety. So we kind of list some things that's important for people that have to be addressed. We have to look at harm reductions, legal obligations and mandates, because some people have some legal obligations from the courts, and these things have to be addressed. But at the same time, the most important thing here is to balance things that are important to the person as well as things that are important for the person, and explaining them when you're putting them in the plan that, yes, this plan is yours, and we're going to address those things that are important to you. But as far as your health and safety, we also have some things that we have to place in this plan that's going to address what's important for you. And again, you're collaborating on those things. But one of the other areas you deal with when you're looking at things that are important to you and things that are important for you, and that long list of areas of life functioning, social roles, jobs, education, relationship, when you have that many opportunities for goals, then you're gonna have to start looking at preferences and priorities. Because we kind of say, you want to have no more than about 3 goals that you're working on at one time. But those life functioning areas we just listed a few minutes ago, it's like 11 or 12 of them. So everybody has the potential to have 11 or 12 goals in those areas, but we have to prioritize. So you're having to collaborate with the individual receiving service and yourself and saying, okay, what is the priority? That's not meaning we're not going to address some of those other areas of life functioning that's important to you, but we have to prioritize and we have to make some preferences and say, okay, we're going to work on these first 3 for the next few years, and then we'll come back and add on as time permits. But you have to make sure that you're working with the individual and collaborating them and prioritizing which things that we're going to address first. And make sure when you're doing the summary, you're making a statement that we work together and we prioritize that these are the 2 or the 3 things we're going to address right off, and why we're addressing those things in comparison to 2 or 3 others that was on the list. And also when we're looking at the goals for persons receiving services, you want to look at what kind of strengths and abilities they have that's going to support them in reaching those goals. Those strengths can be strengths from the person receiving services. Strengths can be your natural support system, they can be, identified by these people. So even though you have the individual receiving services, they're asking them, what are your strengths? You also can talk with their support system and see what strengths do they have that can support that person in their recovery. Sometimes if a person is trying to get a job and they have a family member that has a car who's willing to take them to their job every day, or willing to take them on an interview, that's a strength that they have somebody who can support their goal. And you need to incorporate those strengths into their planning process. So it's important to identify strengths, not just strengths for the sake of identifying strengths. A lot of times we'll see on the plan where, an assessment in the planning process where you say, okay, they have a strength of, they easily make friends, they have a car, they have all these strengths going for them, which is great. But we're thinking in terms of what strengths do you have that's going to support you in reaching your goal. So first you're figuring out this is what the person's goal is. And even though they have a lot of strength, you only want to list those strengths that's going to support them in reaching those goals that's going to become a part of the plan. And we say this because one of the important things is we don't want to have a lot of strength that you identify and they're just sitting there on the shelf. They're basically strengths that are not being used as a part of the plan. So that's why you don't want to think in terms of every strength that the person possesses, which is awesome. But what strengths do they have that you can use in helping them to reach their goals? And recognizing that strengths can be ongoing. When a person first comes into the assessment process, they may not, recognize what their strengths are. They may not know what their strengths are. It may be that they have to have some opportunities to be successful in reaching some of their goals and objectives, to recognize these are some strengths that they have, or giving them opportunities where their strength can come forth. So again, even though you have to have some strength that you're listing at the beginning of the process, just recognize, as we said before, the assessment process is ongoing and continuous. So as you're working with people, you're having an opportunity to identify other strengths that they have that can support them in reaching their goals. And making sure that these strengths are unique to each goal. So even though you list one or two strengths, you all have to think, are those strengths going to help them with the different goals? It's more than one goal they have. So don't think in terms of this one strength is going to help them with all their goals, because that may not be the case. And it may be, but it may not be the case. So just thinking in terms of making sure you recognize that the strengths are unique for each goal. So the strength I use to help me with employment, there may be another strength I possess that's going to help me as far as being able to get my children back or being able to find housing. So the strengths are going to be unique to each goal. We also say in regard to strength to make sure that you try to list those strengths in phrases. Because if you say a family member is a strength, then it's hard to figure out how to use that in the planning process, because what strength do they have to support you? Is it their strength because they have transportation to help you get a job? Are they a strength because they're there to support you in writing resumes or whatever your goals are? So it's best if you just not make it a one word, so you can figure out how to use that strength. It's best to use it to write it in phrases, so you'll be real specific in how that person or that situation is a strength for that individual. And finally, when it comes to strength, we talk about the functional assessment. The functional assessment with the DL20 is being used right now for adults in the campus for children's services. You can look at, say, for example, the DL20, look at the assessment instruments and find strengths there. If you're in a conversation with people during the assessment process, you're not able to identify some strengths or from that individual or from their support system, you can use a functional assessment, because if a person scores high in the area of a functional assessment, that could be identified as a strength. That's something they can use that support them in reaching their goals. So if you can't get it in the conversation with the person or their support system, there is another avenue for looking at strengths, and that's through use of the functional assessment. The areas where they score high can be areas that can be considered strengths for the individual receiving services. Of course, we have a strength-based system, and we're very focused on looking at people's strengths, but you also have to think in terms of what are the roadblocks, what interferes with the person reaching their goals, and these are the barriers. And the barriers are important because your services, your intervention is set up to address those barriers. So your barriers can take the form of, transportation, financial resources, physical health, basically what is getting in the way of the person achieving their goal. Why she can't do this today? why they can't do it for themselves. So you're looking at, okay, if your goal is to go back to school, okay, what's standing in the way of you going back to school? In some cases, it could be the impact of my illness. It could be a lack of transportation. It could be some behavioral concerns I have, being able to interact with other people, being able to stay focused. So you're thinking in terms of, okay, this is what you want to do in your life. This is your goal. These are the things, the strength you have to help you to reach that goal. And all that is great, but we also need to figure out what is standing in the way of you having the life that you want. What are those barriers? And being able to identify those barriers, because that is the focus of treatment. As I said before, the clinical staff, their job is to help the person identify those barriers so they can either remove those barriers, they can reduce them, resolve, or help them to overcome the barriers that's occurring in their life as a result of their diagnosis. So that is the focus of treatment, is to looking at a close look at what those barriers are. Most of the time, when you're thinking in terms of barriers, they're going to probably hit in one of these areas. Like some of the things that are getting in the way could be a lack of resources, that we said before, issues dealing with your behavior, challenges in your daily living, which could be addressed in the functional assessment, challenges as a result of your mental illness or substance use. So these are just kind of some key things when you're thinking in terms of what's standing in the way. This is kind of be like a cheat sheet, a guide to help you to think in terms of what's standing in the way of people receiving their services. And again, this is probably one of the important areas as far as the treatment is concerned, because your treatment is going to help you your treatment is focusing on reducing, removing, or relieving the impact of these barriers as far as the person's ability to have the life that they want. The final part in the assessment process is summing up all this information, because your summary is going to kind of bridge all this data that you've gathered and summarize it so they can utilize this information in the plan. So you want to take all this information and summarize it so whatever is in the assessment flows over into the plan. And when you're developing a plan, if it's not addressed in the assessment, it would not be addressed in the plan. That's why you want to make sure you summarize it so everybody is on the same page and getting the same information as far as what is going on with this individual and what services that this person needs. So basically, we'll sum it all up. We would have addressed all of it in the conversation we just had, and like your summary is just like a general hypothesis or understanding of regarding what drives the person, their experience as far as their mental illness is concerned. You want to look at, when you summarize all these things, what are their preferences and their prioritizations? So what are you going to address in the service plan? Making sure you've identified what's important to and important for the person. What are their strengths and their abilities? What are the barriers and things that are standing in the way? You want to make sure you summarize their trauma history, any cultural factors that may be impacting their treatment, and very important, their readiness for change in those different functioning areas. If one of their goals is to go back to school, and one of their goals is to deal with their criminal history, some kind of arrest records, then what is their readiness for change in dealing with those particular goals? What is standing in the way in regard to those different goals, and how you and why, and you prioritize that as a goal in which they're going to address in their plan. And also discussing the natural resources in the community to help the person, because one of our focus is to integrate people back into their community. And finally, you want to recommend what is the course of treatment for the individual receiving services. So you're recommending that they may go into psychosocial rehab, that they may go into different services. And not only what services that you recommend, but the intensity and the length of the treatment. And all that will be, again, addressed back based on their need for services and the assessment process. So again, this kind of summarizes the assessment process. And again, everything in the assessment is going to be utilized in developing a treatment plan for the individual receiving services. And the focus is to make sure that the individual is a part of the assessment process and truly making sure it's a conversation and it's a dialogue and not an interrogation. Because it's very hard for a person that's coming in to be able to provide you with all this information at a time when the impact of the illness is at its greatest. And that's why I think it's really important to make sure, if it's at all possible, that the person has a support system when they're coming into the assessment process. and that they are familiar with, what's going to happen, so that they don't come in thinking, okay, once I finish this assessment, I'm going to get some medication, I'm going to be feeling better in a couple of days. That is, it may not be as quick as they think it is. After this assessment, some people think, okay, I'm gonna go get an appointment and go see the therapist. And it may be a week or 2 weeks before you can actually see the therapist. So just having enough information so they can make informed decisions and be a part of the assessment process is key to the engagement of the individual in receiving services. So again, that concludes the assessment process of the golden thread. And then once you complete the assessment, the next process, as we said, you take that information gathered from the assessment and you're able to develop a plan based on that information. So the easiest thing is taking a look at the summary, where you summarize the need for services and the level and intensity of services and the barriers and the stage of readiness. And based on that information, you're moving into developing a plan for service. And the plan, as we said before, the plan is only as good as the assessment. There's nothing that's going to be in the plan that wasn't discovered in the assessment process. And the plan is just the structure, goal-oriented schedule of services developed jointly by the individual receiving services and the treatment team. We have another, one of our other series in this training is going to talk to you about the individual service plan. In this particular one, we're going to talk about the planning process that's called the recovery support plan. And all the information in the individual service plan is kind of pulled over into your recovery support plan, but we're going to focus more on the recovery support plan and how the individual service plan impacts that. For example, the first thing that you address in your service plan is the individualized area need. This is more the clinical assessment of the area need. Remember earlier we asked about what the person thought was their need, why were they there? And based on that assessment, you're going to talk about, okay, you're going to elaborate a little more on how you identify the symptoms and the behavior and what your clinical area need is. Elaborate more on how long those symptoms or behaviors have been present, how often those behaviors are present, and how they've impacted the person's quality of life. So you have this area of need that's going to be addressed in the plan, but in the end, it's included in the individual service plan. But you take, when it comes to the recovery support plan, all you're doing is cutting the information from the individual service plan and dropping it over in the recovery support plan with your area of need. You're not having to analyze that yourself on the recovery support plan. It's already identified for you in the service plan. You also, on your recovery support plan, you're looking at the long-term goals and the short-term goals. So you've already said what the person, their needs are. So the next step is, what are their long-term goals? This is their dreams and goals and their life aspirations in the future. The long-term goal could be 2 to 3 years out and being able to attain it. So it's kind of reflecting their final destination. So what you're basically saying is, as a result of treatment, this is what I want my outcome to be. I want to have a home. I want to have my family all in one place. I want to go back to school and get a degree in engineering or social work. So my final destination as a result of service is this. That is my long-term goal. And we basically say that a long-term goal is something that should be expressed in the individual's own words. And even though we say that, we still want you to kind of peel the onion back. Like I see a lot of quotes when a person say, I want a better quality of life. I want to be happy. That's great to put that in their words, but you want to also kind of peel the onion back and say, okay, well, what does happy look like for you? Because happy for me could be one thing and happy for another person could be something different. So you want to know when you reach that end of that journey. And the only way to do that is to be real specific of what that's going to look like. So you have to ask a few more questions. The first thing come out of a person's mouth is great, but that gives you a starting point. So you want to ask a few more questions. We use the example all the time with a young boy who said he wanted to be a drug dealer. And they wrote on there, okay, he wants to be a drug dealer. Then we're saying, okay, we'll go back and have the conversation with him. Okay, why do you want to be a drug dealer? We went back and had the conversation with him, well, why you want to be a drug dealer? He said, because drug dealers make a lot of money. Okay, so it's not so much as you want to be a drug dealer, as you want to make a lot of money. So then the next question, when you're peeling that onion back, well, if you made a lot of money, what would you do with it? I would buy a house. Okay, so it's not so much as he wanted to be a drug dealer and make a lot of money. He wanted a home for him and his mom. So the long-term goal is not necessarily want to be a drug dealer or making a lot of money, but having a home for him and his mom. So you see how you continue to ask questions and say, okay, give me a little bit more specific of what that would look like. If you want to be happy, what makes you happy? What would your world look like when you're happy? So again, we're not just taking the first thing that they say as far as their goal, but actually asking a few more questions so you can peel the onion back to be really clear on what is the outcome of treatment for them. Again, as we said, the long-term goal is something that could be 2-3 years out. So what you want to do is to break that down into short-term goals, because people have to experience success to kind of stay on this road, on this journey. So even though those long-term goals is your target, it's where you're headed, but there are some things that we have to do right now to get us there. Because I may want to be to get this job or to buy this house, but there's some steps that has to take place before I can get there. So it may be you look at, okay, in order to get the house, that's your long-term goal, but what do we need to start doing now to move in that direction? It may be to get a house, you got to be able to make the note on that house, be able to pay the mortgage. So your short-term goal may be to get a job. I might need to get some employment. And to get that particular job that you want, you may have to go back to school and get your GED or get a high school diploma. So some education may have to take place. So we're saying that what are some of the small steps that you can do right now that's going to lead you to that long-term goal? So you want to break that down into smaller steps. You want to also make sure you write that in a positive term, because we do have a strength-based system. So instead of saying, I will not have outbursts in school, or I will not argue with my mom, you will say, I will attend school and I will attend school and speak positive with my coworkers or with my team, my schoolmates or my teacher. So not to say what you will not do, but be in positive terms to say what will happen. And you want to make sure your short-term goals are measurable, because you want to make sure you know when that has happened. So it has to be measurable, so you'll know that when you have reached that short-term goal. And again, it has to be linked back to the assessment. So whatever those goals were in the assessment that you're breaking down into short-term goals, it all has to relate back to the assessment. Remember, we said that your plan is only as good as your assessment instrument. So now that you have your long-term goals, what you want your work to look like at the end of treatment, and you've broken those long-term goals into short-term goals, things that you can work on now, short-term being within the next year. So you have your long-term goals, your short-term goals, and then the next is your objectives, which is what are you going to do, the individual receiving service, and what is the individual going to do to change or accomplish or to reach their goal. So it's what people themselves will do, change or accomplish in order to achieve their goals. So the objective rests with the individual receiving services. And never saying that a service is an objective, like the person will attend psychosocial rehab. That's not an objective, because even though you attend psychosocial rehab, doesn't mean you're going to reach your goal just by attending it. So you basically want to talk about what will the person do and what will they change or what will they accomplish in order to achieve their goal. And remembering that the focus of the objective is the removal of the barrier. You want to think in terms of what is keeping that person from reaching their goals. And those, that focuses in on your objective. Your objective typically begins with a sentence that say the individual will, and you're going to describe any kind of change in their behavior, a change in their functions, symptoms, or competencies in order to help them to reach their goal. So what is the person going to change as far as their behavior? What they're going to change as far as their competencies? What are they going to change to help them to reach their goal? What are they going to change, or what are they going to do in order to reach their goals? To give you more of a cheat sheet, as far as the objective is concerned, one of the things that's in a recovery support plan you would look at is what are they going to change as far as their conditions, like, housing may be something that they will work with towards reaching their objective. It may have something to do with their symptoms, their functioning level, their behavior, their competencies, or their conditions. So you're going to say, what are they going to change in regard to their condition, their housing, to reach their goal? Or what are they going to change in regard to their behavior? So if a person is trying to go to work, and one of the things that they do is they have arguments with everybody that they're working with, then what are you going to change in your behavior so that you can go to work? So you may go from having an argument with a person once, twice every day to trying to reduce that down to twice a day. So, what are you going to change as far as intensity and frequency in your behavior that's going to help you reach that goal? You can also say, what are you going to do in regard to your DLA 20? If you have a low score in your DLA 20 in regard to your personal hygiene, and you want to go to work, so it may be that I'm going to increase my score from a 1 to a 2 for me to go to work, which means I'm going to work more on my personal hygiene and that score is low on my functional level. So your objective is to raise your functional level as far as your personal hygiene is concerned. That's the thing that you can do as far as your objective. So again, when you're writing the objective, what the person will do or what they'll change in regard to support their goals, you want to make sure that you have no more than 2 or 3 objectives per goal, because that's pretty much the number that a person can work with. Try to make sure your objectives are singular state and not compound. So you wouldn't say he will attend school and get straight A's. He might maybe the first thing, like when you're trying to raise a bar, the first part of the objective is he will attend school every day. So when you get him to the point where he's attending school, then the next objective will be, then he will complete his homework assignment. Then the next objective he will have an average score of a B. You don't want to say he'll attend school, complete his homework assignment, and make a B all as one objective. Because the problem is, in order for him to achieve that objective, all 3 of those things has to happen at one time. And that may take more than 2 months, 3 months, or 6 months for all 3. You might get one of them, and he can't celebrate having achieved that objective because he has 2 other things that has to happen to achieve that objective. So that's why it's better to make them singular stated. And even though there may 3 or 4 things had to happen, that helps you to raise the bar. So first you do this, and then this will happen. This will happen in 3 months. 3 months, you'll get up and go to school every day. Within 6 months, you actually be turning your written assignments. And within a year, you'll be making A's and B's on your tests. So you're kind of raising the bar as time go on. And you want to make sure your objectives are very clear, that it's saying the same thing to whoever looking at it, everybody's saying the same thing, so you'll know when that person has reached that objective and there will be no confusion and whether the objective has been met or not. The other thing about objectives is that objectives have to meet the SMART format. They have to be specific. Like, what exactly are we going to do with or for whom? So the outcome has to be very clear. What is the person going to do? It has to be very specific. It has to be measurable. You have to be able to determine if that objective has been accomplished. As evidenced by, how will you quantify whether the objective has been met? It has to be achievable and reasonable based on the resources that the person have available, based on their stage of readiness. Can they achieve this objective? And is it reasonable? Is it something that the average person can do, or do you have to be superhuman in order to reach this objective? Because sometimes you may say, for a person who's never gotten up in the morning on time, you may say, well, for 5 days out of the week, you got to get up at 7 o'clock. For the last 10 years, I haven't been getting up to 10. So, is that reasonable based on where that person is in their recovery or in their stage of readiness? So you want to make sure that it's specific enough so we'll know exactly what the person's going to do. How we know whether it's been done, that is being measurable. Is it achievable and reasonable based on where they are in their stage of readiness, based on the resources that they have available to them? And do you have a time frame? This is going to happen in 3 months, 6 months, or 1 year. And one of the things we look at is why we try to make sure that you kind of raise the bar over time, is that you don't want to see all your objectives happen in 12 months, or all of them happen in 6 months. So if you have 3 objectives, they all shouldn't happen at the exact same times, because you're kind of raising the bar. So in 3 months, this will happen. In 6 months, this is expected to happen. And in 1 year, this is expected to happen. We typically see all objectives will be just one time frame. All of them will happen in 1 year. So just make sure you're raising the bar and staging out the target dates and meeting those objectives. So now you have your long-term goal, which is what you want the outcome of the treatment to be. You have your short-term goals, which is the baby steps that you're going to be taking to reach them. Then you have the objectives, which is what you're going to do to help you to reach your goal. And then finally, you have the interventions, which is what the staff person, the clinical staff, or the recovery support staff, or the peer specialist as far as recovery support plan. What are you going to do in order to help the person to reach their goals? And sometimes, as we said, in some cases, you had a family member as a strength and a support system. So sometimes there may be a role for the family member as far as an intervention, because if they're going to take the person to work every day because they have strength as they have a car and willing to take them to work, then they may be a part of your recovery support plan as far as the intervention that they would have. But basically, the intervention is what it's the tools in the toolbox for the staff person. So what are you going to do that's going to have an impact on the person's life functioning? When you think in terms of the intervention for that you're going to use, you're going to look at who's going to do it, what they're going to do, when they're going to do it, and then why is it being done. So who's going to do it? Like we said before, this is your recovery support plan. The two people that work on this recovery support plan is a certified peer support specialist and a recovery support specialist. And a community support specialist, I'm sorry. The two people that complete a recovery support plan is a community support specialist and the peer support specialist. So you want to start out saying the peer support specialist will, the community support specialist will, or the family member will. Who's going to do it? And then you're going to specify what they're going to do. Am I going to provide some one-on-one? Am I going to provide some group? Am I going to take this person to work on their anxiety by putting them in a crowd and being able to work on their some techniques, calming skills? So specifically, be real specific of what it is that you're going to do, what services you're going to provide. And then talk about when you're going to provide them, which is your frequency and duration. And again, all this relates back to the need statement, which relates back to the need and the assessment. If you have a need statement where this person it shows that identifies that they need services 5 days a week, 1 hour a day, and then when you do your intervention, you say, okay, it's going to be 1 day a week, 1 hour a day. It's not relating back to the need statement. And also we're looking at, if you say you're going to do it 3 days a week for 1 hour, when we look at the progress note, we want to see you providing that intervention 3 days a week for 1 hour, because that's what you said you're going to do in your intervention. So make sure your intervention relates back to the need, and then make sure that whatever you put as your win is how you're going to be addressing in your progress notes. So you're going to say who's going to do it, exactly what they're going to do, when they're going to do it, and why are they doing this. Identify the impact of this intervention. You're linking it back to the goal. So why am I providing this intervention? Because it's going to address this particular barrier. It's going to either have an impact on it, remove it, or lessen this barrier so that this person will be able to reach their goals. Remember, your intervention is focusing on what is standing in the way of the person reaching their goal. So you're going to say, what am I going to do, when you're going to do it, and why you're going to do it. How's it going to impact that barrier? And finally, as a result of COVID, you also probably want to say where you're going to do it, because sometimes we're able to go out and do things face-to-face. Sometimes it's through Zoom. So just making sure you're addressing how you're going to provide the intervention. Is it going to be face-to-face, or is it going to be through Zoom? So again, to sum it all up in the planning process is that, you got your long-term goal, which is as a result of treatment. 2-3 years from now, this is where I want to be. So you want to try to begin with the end in mind. And then you have your short-term goals, where you're breaking down those long-term goals into manageable steps. So people can see that they're achieving something, they can see success. Because it's hard to work on something that you're not going to see any return for 2-3 years. But if you're doing something in 3 months, you can say, oh, wow, I accomplished that. I have this feeling of accomplishment. I can celebrate. I'm feeling good about it. You'll continue to work that plan. And then you have your objectives, that you want to make sure the individual is a part of the process. What are you going to do? Because they have to have some buy-in. They have to have a role in their own recovery. So this is what the individual is going to do. And then you're ending it with, what are you going to do to help that person reaching their goals? And your focus is what is standing in the way of the person having the life that they want. Your interventions are going to focus on those barriers, removing or decreasing or impacting those barriers so that person can have the life that they want. So again, in this series, we've talked about the assessment, we've talked about the recovery support plan, and the last of it is the progress notes. Remember when we talked about the golden thread, the last of it being the progress notes, which is going to address the need for treatment and why, how this person is responding to those interventions. And the progress is an opportunity for you to continue to assess what is going on with the individual receiving services. So it's basically that chart of the individual's journey through the continuum of care. So each person in the Mississippi system have to complete a progress note based on the SAP format. Our SAP format is basically the summary, the assessment, and the plan. So basically when you're writing a progress note, you're just gonna write about, you're gonna have to do a summary, an assessment, and the plan. And we're gonna break down those 3 areas for you. Basically, the summary is when you see the person or meet with the person through Zoom or face-to-face, you're gonna say, how did the person present themselves? You know, what did you see? If it's over the call, what did you hear? What are your general observations in the first contact with the person? Once you've done that, you kind of focus in on the reason for services. Why did you go to see the person in the first place? It's basically, you know, what did you see when you got there based on that phone call, and why did you go out to see the person? And what is the intervention that you use? This is important because you have to kind of have a plan when you go out to see a person. You know, what is the intervention? Why am I going out to see this person? What is the technique of the intervention I'm going to use? Because if you go out there to see a person, you just say, well, how are you doing? They can tell you 50 things about how they're doing, but none of that had to do with what is on the plan. That is all great information, but the first and most important thing is you have to address what is in the plan. So if your intervention is to go out there and work on their anxiety and use some coping skills, then that is what you're going out there to talk about and to meet with the person on and see how they're responding to that intervention. And once you've done that, then you can ask other questions about, okay, what else is going on with you? Because again, you're continuously assessing what's going on with people. But first and foremost is you have to go out there and address what is in your plan. So you're thinking, you always look at your plan and why am I going out to see this person? What is the purpose of my encounter with them? And then what is the intervention that I'm using? Like if you're going out doing some therapy, you're working on socialization roles, you're taking them out in the community to work on their anxiety and practicing deep breathing techniques. You know, why are you going out to see that person? So once you've done the summary, then the next stage of your progress notes is assessment. How is that person responding to those interventions? Is there any progress being made? That's important because if that intervention you're working on is to be accomplished in 3 months, you don't want to wait till the 3rd month and say, okay, they're not responding to this intervention, it's not working. You want to know early on that, do I need to make some changes in this intervention? Do I need to make some changes in the goal? Maybe that's not a goal that they want anymore. Or this intervention is not working, so we need to get back to the team and make some changes. So again, you're continuously assessing how people are responding to treatment, how they're responding to that intervention, and what kind of significant changes is being made with that person. Because again, we're continuously assessing. If you go out there and this person, your goal is to work on deep breathing techniques. But if you get out there and you find out the house is burned down, they have no place to stay. So you're not going to go out there and ask them about their deep breathing techniques. You're going to deal with the crisis at hand, which is a housing situation. So maybe you have to deal with that for the next 2 or 3 months, and then you go back to what is in the plan. But if that crisis continues over a long period of time, then that means you have to reassess what's in the plan, and you may have to go back and make some changes to the plan because plans change because people change. You found there's a significant change in that person's life, and it needs to be addressed in the plan. Sometimes there's a change in their life, you can address it in the next couple of visits, and you don't have to make changes to the plan, but you just write it in your progress notes. But sometimes you got some new findings, and there's a need to reassess and make some changes to the service plan. But outside of that, the basic assessment is that how's the person responding to the interventions and if there any progress being made. So you're just reporting that this is the intervention that I came to work on. This is how they responded to the intervention, and there is some progress being made and a need to continue with this treatment plan. The last part of it, after you've done the assessment and the plan, the summary and the assessment, is the planning process. Now, what is the person or the family member going to do in the next session? So before you leave, you have to have a plan for the next session. So you're going to plan what they're going to do between now and the next time you see them, and even what you're going to do between now and the next time you see them. And when is that next session going to be? So if you're saying that between now and the next time I see you, if you're working on getting a job, or what you're going to do is complete 3 resumes. So between now and next week, when I see you, you will have completed 3 resumes. What I'm going to do is contact some agencies to find out whether there's employment opportunities for you. So when you come back to the next meeting at the date you have scheduled, when you're looking at your assessment, you're coming out there to deal with what did you ask them to do between now and the next time you saw them, and then also report on what you did. So each plan is kind of following what you said you're going to do the next time you see them. So I saw you on Monday. I said, next Monday when I see you, you will have worked on your resume. So next Monday when I come to see you, the first thing we're going to talk about is, how did the resume go? What does that look like? You know, that is the intervention. That is what you're going out there to see them about, which is the resume, which is what you ask them to work on between now and the next time you see them. So you're continuing to follow that process. Every time you leave, you're leaving with an assignment for them, something that you're going to do between now and the next time you see them, and then telling them when the next time you're going to see them. So you'll continue to follow that path. It makes it a lot easier on you, because all you have to do is look back at your previous note and say, this is what happened the last time I saw them, and this is what we're going to work on the next time that I see them. And that address your individual notes, but of course some people, some community support and peer support do group. So again, when you do your group notes, your summary is going to be very general because they're all participating in the same group. But your assessment is going to be more individualized. You're going to be assessing how that person responded to that group activity. Not how everybody responded, because everybody response to it is going to be different. How that group impacts that person's short-term goals, and how they responded. And then the plan is, what are you going to do between now and the next time that y'all meet? So the most unique part about the group progress note is the assessment part, because that part has to be very individualized and based on their objectives and interventions and goals. And the final thing about the progress note to remember is, like we said before, just be aware of your plan before the session. You know, your plan may change in what you're going out there to do, but first and foremost, you just have to have a plan when you go out there. So your plan may need to change, but first and foremost, you got to have a plan of why you're going out there to see that person, which is meaning you need to take a look at your plan before the session. And if that plan is no longer relevant, if they're not making any progress, they're not working on those objectives and interventions, it's not that the person, first thing we're going to say, they may be non-compliant. Well, it may just be that we're not in agreement with this plan. So sometimes that plan becomes irrelevant and we have to change the plan. If we see the same plan from year after year after year after year, it's most likely that that plan is no longer relevant for that person. So we need to go back and reassess, and we may have to make some changes in the plan, because again, as we said before, plans change because people change. What I wanted to do today, what my goals and objectives and dreams and things were today, it may 6 months from now, something significant could have happened in my life, and that's no longer the direction in which I want to go in. And we as staff, we can't take that personal, because we ourselves sometimes set out to say, okay, 1 year from now, this is where I want to be. But 6 months from that time when you made that statement, you might find yourself, well, I was on my way there, but now I'm here. And this is actually a great place to be. I no longer want to go any farther than where I am now. This is the destination in which I want to be. So just always be prepared that the plan may change, but first and foremost, we have to have a plan to work with. And again, that is the golden thread of assessment, planning, and progress notes. And it's golden because if we follow those threads, that we're going to have a plan in which we can be able to evaluate whether the progress notes is being impacted by the plan, and the plan is being impacted by the assessment. All those things have to connect, and the cycle will continue until discharge. So just remember that the note leads to the plan, and the plan review is based on the assessment. And sometimes we do have to have some updates along the way, but the most important part is those things all interconnect. Again, thank you for being a part of this series. If you have any questions about the plan, the progress notes, and assessment, please don't hesitate to contact Brent Hurley. His number is 359-1288, or you can reach him on his email at brent.hurley@dmh.ms.gov.